On May 6, 2015, I and my fellow educators walked out of school. It was a demonstration, a strike light, if you will. We walked out as a protest against our state's legislature for not providing adequate state-level funding. How did we get to this point? Well, it started in January 2007, when a small-town family, Matthew and Stephanie McCleary, along with dozens of other stakeholders, including districts and teachers' unions, filed a lawsuit against the state, claiming that Washington was not meeting its constitutional duty to adequately fund public schools. The McCleary family noticed this disparity of funding in their own rural school district, especially in comparison to the seemingly well-funded, wealthy suburban school district. How could there be such inequities? The state was underfunding education. Education had seen a 10% cut in the last decade, and the 2009 recession piled on more budget cuts, including a 1.9% budget cut on teachers' salary. But wait, how are some districts seemingly full budgeted? Local levies. Local communities can pump more funding into their education system through levies. Wealthy communities can afford the increase in property taxes, whereas other communities, such as McCleary's rural town, cannot pass levies, or if they do, lower home values equal lower received funds. So it's a true case of rich versus poor. The McCleary attorney stated that local levies were paying for basic education, which is against the Washington State Constitution. It clearly states in Article 9, it is the paramount duty of the state to make ample provisions for the education of all children residing within its borders, without distinction of preference or on the account of race, color, caste, or sex. To support this conclusion, the attorney leaned on 5 pieces of evidence. The first piece of evidence is Seattle School District versus the state. In this 1977 case, the Supreme Court found that the state was underfunding education. As an outcome, the state ruled that legislature needed to fully fund school transportation by the 1980 to 81 school year. However, there was a lack of accountability, and this did not come to fruition. The second piece of evidence is the Basic Education Act, which helps define what is and is not basic education. It states that successful education is based on academic outcomes, not opportunities. The state will cover full operating costs, and funding will not decline over the years. The third piece of evidence is that in 2010, local levies were raised, suggesting that the local governments are seeking out ways to fund education. Additionally, the House Bill 2216 passed in 2009. Although it had bipartisan approval, it doesn't really truly solve the state funding problem. And finally, the state had been claiming federal funding as state funding, which was unlawful. These are the 5 points they made. Representing the state, William Clark defended the state's position. It was funding basic education. The first point was semantics, essential education versus enhancements. It was pointed out that the state had not cut any essential education needs, merely cut enhancements. Then it was stated that the statutes are constitutional. No one has argued that they were not constitutional. Thus, through reason, the state should be fully funding education. And opposing the plaintiff, he insisted that basic education is about opportunities and not outcomes. It was also pointed out that the broad language of Article 9 creates an unobtainable standard that has become a burden to uphold. And finally, it was mentioned that House Bill 2261 has already been enacted to support the funding of education. So was there really a need for this lawsuit? In February 2010, a King County Superior Court Judge, John Ehrlich, sides with the plaintiffs, stating that public schools are failing to equip all children with the basic knowledge and skills mandated by this state's minimum education standards. In January 2012, Washington State's Supreme Court upholds this decision. They set a deadline for the legislature to produce a long-term plan and a biennial funding of $3.5 to $7 billion. Is it time to celebrate yet? No, not yet. Let's listen to the outcomes. Following the Supreme Court decision, there were many back and forths between the court and legislature, a bit of a cat and mouse game. In addition, within legislature, there was a back and forth between the Democratic and Republican Party. So let's start first with the back and forth between the court and legislature. About a year after the Supreme Court made its decision, the court and legislature went head to head. The court believed legislature was not moving fast enough, but legislature insisted that it needed more time to figure out a budget, as there was no money. There were many plans put in place, some from the GOP stating that they could possibly take down the local levies and increase state levies. Democrats thought a capital gains tax would be brilliant. And then other people just thought the taxes were all kinds of messed up and we maybe needed to do an income tax. There were many suggestions and none of them really stuck. And that was the problem. So they went back and forth with the court saying that they need to come up with a plan, and legislature not being able to come up with a plan and just fighting amongst themselves between the Democrats and the Republicans. This went on for years. And sadly, this tale does not end as beautifully as it should have. They admit that they failed. They weren't able to meet the full plan as they promised, but they did close the suit. They did as much as they could in their eyes, and they said that it was time to move on. In 2018, they had dropped the case completely.